In our previous video, we talked about how taking your data and turning it into a story can make it more accessible to your audience, can make them more receptive to what you're saying, and can help you if you are trying to share a vision, organizational values, inspire action, teach a lesson, or build trust. It's important in terms of storytelling with data to help in terms of fighting cognitive bias and help to win hearts and minds. But you have to understand the audience and you have to know what it is you are trying to accomplish. So how do you go about telling stories with data? Well, in order to tell stories with data, we have to have the right data, the right visualizations, and the right combination of data and visuals. So does the information help with the argument we're trying to make? So do we have the right data? So we could look at, for example, the survey data from our bargaining that we've been talking about before. So we have a survey of our members of our union, and we're trying to get across at the bargaining table at negotiations that there's an issue with the South location where people are not satisfied with the working conditions. They don't feel safe. So do we have the right data to aid in our argument? Well, if we're looking at our data, and I'm just going to move my face. Here we have data that conveys their dissatisfaction. Now, when we look at this, yes, that pie chart shows they're dissatisfied, and yes, that graph on the bottom shows that the South is more dissatisfied, but notice that even if we have the right data to convey the information, we also need the right visualizations. We need graphs that add to the arguments we're making. We need visualizations that are not noisy. So we can't have colors or layouts that detract from our argument. They need to be easy to interpret. They need to instill trust. So while nominal and ordinal data can be turned into pie charts, ordinal data really should not ever be a pie chart. And that's because it's really hard to convey the fact that there is ranking or order to it based on a pie. So the chart that's on the top shows that most of the people, well, 44.4% are dissatisfied, 7.9% are completely dissatisfied. But you don't understand that dissatisfied is not as good as neutral when it's all shown equally on a circle. So this pie chart is not easy to interpret when we have a Likert scale question as a pie chart. It's also noisy. The colors detract from our argument. So on the bottom right, we could make it easier to see that the East, North, and South have different opinions. We help with the ranking by making it a stacked chart rather than a pie chart. But notice that it is noisy. The colors detract from the argument. So if you're doing a Likert scale ordinal type question, we need to have a color that is a more better color. So green for go, for example, would be for the more agree. And then we need colors that are more associated with more negative to be the disagree. We need to keep in mind, of course, color blindness and color scales that are difficult for people to see, because then they can't interpret the data and the information you're trying to convey. So you might create a scale where we have one color for the good, one color for the bad, and it's some kind of transition. So for example, instead of going with this color scheme, what if we went with this color scheme? Pinks are bad, red's even more bad, blue is good, dark blue is even better. So we can change the color scheme here in order to help make it easy to interpret, make it less noisy. Now we also need the data to instill trust. So what we can do is we can go from this here where we have the stack chart, and we can actually shift it so they have the same center. Now, if you're shifting it so that it has the same center here, here's the neutral in gray, we can very quickly, easily interpret that people like the East location the best and the South the worst. Now, if instead of this graph here, I had created, let me just move my face, this graph, The problem with this graph here is that it cuts off the right side of all of these. So we can't quite tell if that is where it ends or if information is being hidden. So in fact, we can see, and that's the part of my face just covered up, that there is more to the graphs, right? So east is better. There is this extra component that you can see right here that is being hidden when we look at the graph above. So even spacing on your graph can lead to distrust. So we want to make sure that our visualizations are not noisy, not different colors, easy to interpret, the right kind of graph for the situation. They instill trust because it doesn't look like we're hiding anything. Okay, if you do want to be able to create these graphs like we have here, I'm just going to exit out of this for a second. And this is the Dashboards Python workbook. And you can access this Dashboard Python workbook if you want it here. We are at drstephpowers.github.io/BIA. And we're actually right here in the Dashboard workbook, which you can open in Google Colab, save a copy, edit. And what I've included at the top of this one here is, of course, you have access to the survey, the bargain survey, and our customer relationship management database we've been working through in our other videos. But also you can create this divergent stacked bar chart. So what we do is we start first by creating a cross tab. So this is showing here by location, that's question 23. What is the different Likert scales for question 18, which is about workplace safety? And then here is the more traditional stacked chart that we did in a previous video. You can see north, south, east, but you can see those colors are quite distracting. And so instead, we can use the set of code here where it aligns the middle. And to align the middle, there's some code here that you can kind of just leave alone. It says, okay, find the middle, and this is bar 23. So bar 23 is actually this cross-tab table here. And what it's doing is it's going to find the middle of that. So it's looking for, based on the number of people in the different categories, essentially where is the middle. And then which of the categories has the longest middle section. And that's going to help adjust how wide this graph is, and then it's going to then shift the graph based on that, finding that middle. So you need this extra set of code here that you can just leave as is. The only part you have to change is that this bar 23 here is going to be whatever your crosstab. And then what we have here is that we've changed the color, so we're specifying specifically these shades. And you can pick different ones. There's different shades of blue, and then we have different shades of red and pink here. And we have our horizontal bar graph, stacked equals true, because it is the stacked graph like we saw before. And we're putting in our new colors. That's what this is here. This vertical line here is at the longest. That is tied to this piece here, so that shows you where the center is. And then you'll need this set Z order that's attached to this formatting, so make sure you put that piece in. And then your X labels are also going to be attached to that formatting and that longest there, so make sure you have that. And so it's going to create a graph that looks like this. And this one here, we can see it aligns that neutral and allows us to very quickly compare these three locations, getting our point across. If instead we had created a graph like this, and so the difference you see here, we just compare. So we have these lines are the same, stacked edge. X labels. So you'll notice in this one, we don't have the X labels. That's doing some of the, oh, here we go. Yeah. So in this particular case, what we have is we shifted these graphs over. And so when we do this particular set of code, it looks like something is hidden because we don't know what's to the right. So you want to make sure there is space to the right so that people can have faith or confidence in what you have created. So that code is there available to you if you want to amend your stacked graphs to be much more appealing as we go back to, that's not what I was on, to making data sure that we have the right data and that we have the right visualizations and that we have the right combinations of data and visuals. So we need data that makes a good story. This needs to be data that's insightful, that we can do something with, right? The whole point of conveying this data is we're trying to get people to do something, change their values, lead to action, change their perspectives. What are we trying to get from them? And we need that data to tie at least a little bit to their own experiences to match something they have seen or heard. That is going to make it more accessible, and that's going to make them more likely to accept it. So one of the reasons we stay away from like a hard fact and instead try to provide a story or context around it is because the hard fact they might object to, but the pieces around it, the context, the feelings might tie to things that they have in their personal or professional life that they can attach to. Our data needs to not be ambiguous. That is, we need it so that the information conveyed doesn't have many different interpretations. So we're laying it out so that it's very clear what information, what we can draw away from that data. We're also going to have data that it captures a moment in time. So it needs to provide the context, the situation, the environment that led to this data. And we need to explain that. So put them into that place and time, what's surrounding it, to better understand what is going on. And it needs to be assembled into a meaningful narrative. So we need to be able to craft it like we would a story. So it needs to have the components of a story. Now, storytelling is most important when information is unpleasant, right? We're more likely to resist it. It's disruptive. It's complex. It's too much detail. It's too hard to wrap our brain around. By telling a story, we can make it easier for people to digest, both in terms of making it easier to understand by going through the details and the pieces, seeing the big picture and the details, but also then making us less resistant to something that's more unpleasant or radical change or very risky or very costly, when typically our initial response is just no. Right? So it's trying to make it a bit more enticing. And if it's counterintuitive, if it's something that, we wouldn't really kind of figure out on our own, doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense, by turning it into seeing the big picture and the details, seeing how it all fits together as we build the story, can make it less objectionable. So we need meaningful insight from the data. What is the desired end result? What's our objective with this information that we're trying to convey? How will we know we are successful in getting people to understand and take action from our data? What are the steps we need for them to actually take action? So we need to make sure we lay out whatever information they need and the additional steps to take after that fact. And so this is really tying back to kind of our project management and strategy for our organization, objectives, actions, key performance indicators. When you're conveying data, you're trying to get a point across. And it is just like any type of project or strategic planning. You have an end goal in mind. You have to find what success is. You need to be able to monitor your progress. Are you getting your point across? Are you able to make change? So when we tell stories with data, we're going to need a collection of facts. We're going to need a key argument. What is the main point we are trying to convey with this data? How is this bundle of information that we have all tied together? So we need the data itself, this bundle of information, and from it we need some key highlights, the main points that are going to help us get our point across, and tell how all this is tied together. So when it comes to your key argument, we go back to our different types of data visualization. So remember, this flow chart shows you which data visualization tool to use when. And so we can go back to this flow chart to help us with that key argument. What are we trying to convey? What is the highlight, the key argument, the key point? If we are trying to show change over time, then we probably want some graphs that convey time. Dot plots, bump charts, stacked column charts, line graphs, those very easily understandable in terms of time. If we're trying to show relationships, then showing the parts of the whole, we're looking at kind of the details and how those pieces make up the bigger picture, right? So a donut chart or a pie chart shows you the breakdown of who works at the company or who's buying our product. So we can use those types of charts to convey relationships. We can look at intersections. So this is the point at which, one measurement beats another measurement, where we start to see change. There's a number of different methods for showing that change. You might have a scatter plot or line graphs. So we can show different types of graphs can show that intersection, where how do these interact? When does one metric start beating another metric? We can project forward, so we can look at time and forecasting models. And so there we're looking at things like line graphs. We can compare and contrast. And so we have comparisons that are things like our our bar graphs, our column charts. Our radar plots allow us to compare. So for example, if we're trying to compare how our south location, north location, east location feel about workplace safety, and we could compare that we could look at a chart. We could look at multiple Likert scales with a radar plot to convey how those different locations compare in their feelings. If we want to drill down and show the details, we might look at a process-related visualization. So we might be looking at an organizational chart or a process flow diagram. If we want to zoom out and look at the big picture, maybe we're trying to summarize text, for example, with word trees and word clouds. If we're trying to show the relationships, like we're trying to show clusters of customers and their different characteristics, then we're looking at things like scatter plots and association type. And if we're trying to identify outliers, things that don't match, things that are unique, where it just doesn't fit the rest, we might be looking at variability type graphs to help us identify those outliers or extreme values. So your key argument that you're trying to make is tied to different types of visualizations, and we want to make sure we are using the right type of visualization that makes it easy to understand, it's not noisy, conveys your point, and is trustworthy. So we need a collection of facts. We need a key argument that we're trying to make. Are we trying to change things over time, show relationships, project forward, zoom out, drill down? What are we trying to convey? And then we need to look at understanding. So if we think back to 5W2H, who, what, where, when, why, how, and how much, those are the 5W2H we learned about in like K-12. This will help us build context and the story around it. So who are we talking about? What are we talking about? Where is this happening? Remember, with data, the key is that we want to capture the moment in time, the context, the situation, the environment that led to this data. So we want to give that picture. In order to give that picture, we should ask who, what, where, when, why, how, and how much to help frame that out. We need to understand there's a linear sequence to storytelling, and we want to capture that linear sequence when we tell stories with data. How does the information build to help create understanding, define the argument, specify the next steps? And we want it to be a drama. What is the setting? What is the plot? What are the characters? Who's involved? And provide that visualization that goes with it. When it comes to that linear sequence of a story, there should be a hook. There should be rising insight, gaining more knowledge, wrapping your brain around it. There's an aha moment, a solution, and some next steps. So, for example, let's tell some stories with our bargaining survey. And here's the hook. we have trouble retaining people with needed skills. And so at the bargaining table, we want to convey to the other side that there really is trouble retaining people with needed skills, something they've heard before. And so as we do some rising insight, what we want to do is convey to them, why is there trouble retaining people with needed skills? Well, what we have here to help with our visualizations is first we can show that we are having trouble retaining people with needed skills. The blue shows the skills that administration says we need to have. The red is a measure of the skills that our current employees do have. Notice there's a mismatch. We have a problem. That's our hook. There's a problem we need to solve. So then the question becomes, why can't we retain people who have those needed skills? So then we have results of our survey, for example, this word cloud here, that says, what people are looking for is they're looking for opportunities and flexibility. They have comments about the old South location. They're looking for leadership. They're concerned about the nighttime and campus. There's a number of issues that keep popping up that are related to high turnover and low job satisfaction. So what's the aha moment? The aha moment says, well, if we look at what people are the least satisfied about, the people who are the least satisfied work at the South location. Here's our radar plot where the higher we go out, this is the more satisfaction with location, time of day they work, hours worked, inclusivity, safety. Notice how the people at the South location feel less included, feel less safe. This is the cause of our high turnover, our low job satisfaction. This is why we're having trouble retaining people with needed skills, is that they are not staying because we need to address concerns with the South location. What's the solution? Well, if we can address safety and inclusivity at the South location, then we can increase job satisfaction and we can retain qualified people. So what's the next step? The next step is how we can address that. We could dive deeper into what is the actual safety issue. As this word cloud alludes to it, there's old infrastructure, it's poorly lit at night, and so people don't feel safe. So here's our ways to resolve this that can help the organization. So we can tell a story with our data. We should hook them, give them more information, more context, build on it, lead to that aha moment, and then solutions and next steps. So what we look at is that we look at how do we convey this information. Maybe it's a presentation and we're trying to convey the data, summarize the data we've collected to create change. Maybe we're creating a dashboard, a visual representation of what's happening within the organization, in which case we still need it to help us tell a story. So we need to understand who the audience is, what is it we are trying to do, and then coming back, what are our key arguments? Do we have the data visualization tools that aid in that key argument? And does our story hook people in, build and give them context, and lead to that aha moment as well as next steps?